So hi everyone, my name is Maribel. I'm going to go ahead and start with the presentation. My name is Maribel Dominguez. I am a doctoral student at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston. And today I'm going to be presenting a mediation analysis. I tend to create my presentations pretty simple to follow, but if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. The title of my presentation is Exploring Pathways to Recovery and Psychological Well-Being, examining the role of empathic and social self-efficacy, social support, and social isolation. And the contents of my presentation are going to include the purpose of the mediation analysis, the hypotheses for this project, the mediation model, a description of the independent variables, the mediation variables, then the dependent variables, and then I'm going to go ahead and present the results that I have so far, the implications, the conclusions, and recommendations. And this presentation won't be very long, but let me go ahead and begin with the main content. So a mediation analysis, you can see the figure on the side. We have a predictor with the outcome and a mediator over top. And so basically what it is that it's a statistical method that evaluates the direct or indirect effects of a predictor variable or an outcome variable. The predictor could be the independent variable and the outcome can be the dependent variable. The mediator variable, which I'll explain as in more like human terms in the later slides, is a variable that affects that relationship, could potentially affect or not affect it. So that's the purpose of the analysis. The mediation analysis can help assess the relationship between two variables and how they are impacted by each other. So it helps identify the pathway through which the IV influences the DV. And so the mediation occurs when a variable acts as an intermediate variable or a mediation variable. And so it may help explain the relationship between the predictor and the outcome, essentially. And so this project is focused on the peer workforce. And so I have 4 hypotheses that we worked on. And the first hypothesis is focused on social support as a mediator. And so social support the first hypothesis would be that it would mediate the relationship between empathic self-efficacy and psychological well-being. The second hypothesis is focused on social isolation. And so it's focused on social isolation as a mediator to mediate the relationship within empathic self-efficacy and recovery. The third hypothesis is, again, social support, but this time it's focusing social support with recovery. So the hypothesis is that social support will mediate the relationship between empathic self-efficacy and the recovery. The fourth hypothesis is that social isolation is going to mediate the relationship between empathic self-efficacy and recovery. And hypothesis 2 was focused on isolation. And so this is a mediation model with more detail that I wanted to explain because I'm going to go over these for the results. So if you see, we have the mediator, the X variable, which is the independent variable. And then actually, my apologies, that's a typo. The X is the dependent variable. And then the Y is the independent variable. And so I have a typo, my apologies. But anyways, okay, so the path A follows what the independent variable goes into the mediator and what effects it has. And then the path B goes into how the mediator has an effect on that outcome variable. And so the direct path is assessing whether the mediator has any effect on, it assesses the relationship between the X variable, which is the independent variable, and the Y variable to see what relationship it has. And then path AB includes the mediator variable. And right now, when I explain what the variables are, it's going to get, I think, more interesting. And so the first variable is empathic self-efficacy. This one is acting as our independent variable or the X variable. And so empathic self-efficacy assesses an individual's perceived empathy. It assesses and focuses on that social relationships and the level of confidence that we may have to empathically respond to others, to their needs and their feelings. And so some examples of empathic self-efficacy include the ability to understand and respond to the emotional needs of others, or the ability to manage and regulate one's own emotions and consider helping others, and the ability to provide emotional support to others in times of distress. So this one would be the predictor variable or the X variable in the mediation analysis. And then we go into one of the mediators, the first one, which is social support. And defining social support, it has been described as a buffer against the development of psychological issues, and it helps individuals cope with stress. So it makes us know that having a social a support system may be helpful for our own health and mental health. And so the importance of social support in recovery and psychological well-being is that social support provides a sense of belonging. And so it helps with recovery and it helps with improved psychological well-being or mental health. And social support in the peer workforce has a positive impact and positive health outcomes. Some studies have presented that having social support in the peer workforce has reduced hospitalization rates, and it has increased satisfaction rates and hope and autonomy. Autonomy would be like agency and that self-esteem that an individual may have. And then we go to the second mediator variable from the different hypotheses. Social isolation has been described as a phenomenon in which an individual lacks the sense of belonging. And so it is deficient in fulfilling the quality relationships. Social isolation has been associated with the sense of agency. That's like the autonomy of the individual that they need to be able to develop satisfying and fruitful relationships. And so the importance of social isolation in recovery and psychological well-being is that it may have a negative impact on that recovery and that mental health well-being that the person may need. Social isolation acts as a stressor, and it may activate neurotransmitters in the brain that may lead to anxiety and depression. Social isolation also negatively impacts both physiological factors and behavior. So that's an important takeaway to take about this mediator. So for the dependent variables, these would be the outcome variables. And so the outcome would be recovery. Another outcome of the hypothesis would be psychological well-being. Recovery is a concept that is defined as having hope, meaning and purpose of life, self-esteem building, and self-identity. And for the psychological well-being, the concepts include autonomy, as we've mentioned before, that environmental mastery, personal growth, positive relations with others, and a purpose of life along with self-acceptance. So for the results, I know these look like a lot of numbers. However, there were some interesting results from running the mediation analysis. And so there's the path A that I showed you all in the figure that goes from X to mediator, or it goes to independent variable to mediator, meaning empathic self-efficacy to either social isolation or social support. And basically what it said is that having increased empathic self-efficacy, meaning that ability to recognize others' feelings, to recognize that empathy that you may have, increases with social support, and it increases recovery based on this analysis. And so for those negative kind of like isolation variables, empathic self-efficacy decreased isolation rates, and it decreased the isolation rate based on that path A. And so for the mediator, for the path B, this path B is basically the mediator to the Y variable or the dependent variable or your outcome variable. And so also all the results came out statistically significant, which is very interesting. And again, the mediator and the DV, as social support increased, well-being and recovery increased based on the analysis, and also as social isolation decreased, well-being and recovery increased. So that's something to keep in mind. Then for path C, this path is the one that goes directly, not taking into consideration it's just taking into consideration the X and the Y, or the independent variable and the dependent variable. And so with empathic self-efficacy, that ability to comfort others and understand others' feelings, that those rates as they went up also did well-being and recovery went up, which was something interesting from the analysis. And then we have, oops. My apologies. Okay. Then we have the path C, and that the path C represents the total effect and just the impact of the predictor and the outcome with the mediator. And so something interesting from the analysis is that, as I mentioned before, the dependent variable, which is empathic self-efficacy, seemed to have an impact on recovery, and it also seemed to have an impact on psychological well-being. And what's interesting here is that social support and social isolation were not the main mediators, but they were partial mediators based on what the analysis came out with. And so then we have the path AB that includes the mediator. And so all of the results came out as statistically significant, letting us know that the effect of the mediators was positive on all hypotheses, meaning that the rationality was not negative. And so having social support and not having social isolation in a way based on the results aided in psychological well-being and recovery.
So Maribel?
Yes.
It's Ruth here. Can you go back to the slide there? So what you're saying is that social support and reducing social isolation were part of what caused the recovery, was part of what made things get better, but it wasn't the main thing that made things get better. And we don't know what the main thing is that right?
That's exactly right. So they were partial mediators. And so it lets us know that the empathic self-efficacy and as the predictor variable and the recovery, for example, as one of the hypotheses states, are related, and there's a relationship between the variables, and the social isolation and social support aids in the relationship, but only partially.
And do you know, like, can you tell what percentage it is, or?
Not yet, but that's an interesting question. I'll make sure to include that to try and see if we can get a mean or a percentage.
A percentage. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, let's see here. And so some of the implications for the mediation analysis, of course, we know based on what I mentioned, we can tell that empathic self-efficacy helps in improving recovery and psychological well-being, and that there is a positive impact, even though if it's partial, there is a positive impact from having social support on empathic self-efficacy and psychological well-being, and that there's also a potential negative effect from social isolation on empathic self-efficacy and psychological well-being, even if it's partial. And so some of the implications from this analysis into the peer workforce is that the peer workforce represents a unique population, and that mutual support aspect and that connectivity about lived experiences can be tested as being positive for recovery, meaning that it could help find a pathway to recovery, which is some of the implications from the analysis, which I thought was really interesting. Not only that, but also that hope for recovery, along with reducing substance abuse and improving mental health, that the peer-led interventions create to have a positive impact on the quality of life of individuals. And then finally, for the conclusion and recommendations, I just mentioned that it is important to consider the relationship between the variables so that we know, and similar to Ruth's question, how much they impact recovery and how much they impact psychological well-being, and if they should be considered in interventions. There is further research to understand the paths. I couldn't find research that focused on mediation analysis from the peer workforce focusing on these variables. And so there is a need for research. And also there's a need for interventions that focus on social support and decreasing social isolation, as they could be effective in influencing the path to recovery and psychological well-being. And here I have that's the end of my presentation. It was pretty simple, but if you have any questions, please let me know. And my references. I know that there's a... Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing now. I know there was a lot of numbers, but hopefully it made sense.
This is really exciting to see. And one of the reasons I asked about how much, what percentage, is that we have some other studies that show that 40% of health and mental health is social support. So if you're coming out with that same 40%, that would be really cool.
It would be, and it came out on the analyses, which I thought was amazing. And I was telling Dr. Brown too, like, I can't believe that the concepts of the peer workers is showing on the analysis. So it was exciting.
Yeah, and to have 4 hypotheses that are all significant, that's really insightful, Maribel. Really well done.
Thank you. See, I don't think there's any more questions. I don't mind if there's no questions. I know that this concept, I too had to like read a lot on that mediation because it's complex. But if there are no more questions, Ryan, how do we proceed?
The other thing that I didn't quite get, and so maybe others didn't quite get, and maybe we can go back to, is your diagram with the independent variables and the variables, so that we get I understand that the mediation variable is, it's what, like that one.
Yes.
And the X is the independent or the dependent variable?
The X is the independent variable and the Y is a
dependent. Y is the dependent variable.
My apologies for the typo.
That's all right. Sorry. That's okay. So we're just, so X here was social support and social isolation. Is that right?
X would be the independent variable, and it would be empathic self-efficacy.
Empathic self-efficacy.
Yes.
Okay. And the mediator then is the social support or the...
Yes. A separate hypothesis, it's either like social support or social isolation. And then for the dependent variable, which is the Y, that would be either recovery or psychological well-being.
I see. Okay.
And now I think about it, I should have had, next time I'll have the pathway per result. That way it'll make more sense.
It'll be easier to see. Yeah. And we're not used to looking at this stuff. But we're really happy to have you here doing this because it gives us insight and really lets us see that the social support and reducing social isolation have an impact on people. And those things are nearly free in terms of interventions. It's not like you're having to have a professional person spending $100 an hour to provide a service. The social support and the reducing social isolation can be done with self-help support groups, which is pretty quick, or also, by peer workers guiding people to group activities and things like that provide more social support and reduce social isolation.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. It was really exciting to see the results.
I can't wait to cite your paper.
Ah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this figure is a little bit more like, I guess, simpler. It's just a predictor to the outcome with the mediator. The other one I included because I wanted you all to see the paths that was going to explain, because they all matter. For example, the path A, independent to mediator, or path B, we have to consider all of them, especially for interventions, and to assess the true impact that the peer worker interventions have on people, because they're concepts basically. So it's very, very exciting. Oh, there's a few.
In terms of the path A, path B, I got path C. This is going directly there, but why do you need a path A and a path B?
Path A, because we kind of want to assess the magnitude of the effect of each variable and each relationship. And so the path A would be assessing how empathic self-efficacy impacts social isolation, and then how it impacts social support. So that would be path A. So it's important to assess all the relationships, because even in the total effects of the analysis, we add up the direct versus indirect to get the total. It's almost like I see it as accounting for some reason, but
right. Yeah. So the mediator here is
either social support and hypotheses 2, or social isolation.
And the independent variable is what?
The independent variable is empathic self-efficacy.
So, all right. So that's, you have a way of measuring empathic self-efficacy, and you see how that impacts social support and social isolation. That's path 1. And
yes.
then path A. And path B is where you take social support and social isolation and see how that's impacting recovery and psychological well-being.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And you're also looking at the direct path, and what you're finding is that if you have the mediator, the mediator is doing something because you get a bigger bang for your buck if you go through the mediator than if you go directly from the one to the other, right?
Yes, exactly. And there's still, I guess, polishing to make it more, like I said, visually pleasing and understanding, because I know it can be tricky. But yes, exactly as you explained it, Ruth. Mm-hmm. I think there's some mentions on the chat. Thank you all for the comments on the chat. I appreciate it.
I do see one comment. I'm not sure if it's a question to it. It says drop-in centers are social rehab programs. Is there any research on? That's all I see as far as the chat, but.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm not an expert on social rehab programs, but I'm interested to dive in and read on them in the literature. I'll make sure to do that.
And the answer to that is that there are, and what we've done at Share is we've asked for interns. We can get interns from all over the world who have access to all of their research, and we pay them minimum wage in California, which is $16.04 an hour. And they then search for all the research. And my person in Zimbabwe is earning more than her full professor at the university in her part-time job working for us.
Oh, nice.
But it's a way of getting the research that you need. And there are a lot of interns that'll work for nothing. I mean, we believe that everybody should be paid for what they do. But if you contact one of your local, not even your local, but any university or college about intern ship stuff. You can get people who have access to an academic library who will help you do the, help you get the research on whatever it is you need.
Yes, and then to follow up with his question, research on efficacy, yes, part of the training that we get at the university is theory focused. And so one of the main constructs that we study is self-efficacy. As we know it, self-efficacy is the confidence to be able to conduct a behavior. And so first of all, I thought it was so interesting that the empathic self-efficacy was a construct. I truly didn't know to have that empathy for people could be a confidence level that you can measure. And so for the question on efficacy, I am pretty sure that they should have some sort of efficacy measures for rehab programs, mostly substance abuse. I know that I study marijuana and alcohol and cigarette smoking among adolescents, so they do have the self-efficacy to refuse the drugs. So that's one explanation that I can give to that question about efficacy. And thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.